I'd like to welcome everyone to OCPAC. I know you're all excited today to hear our former NASA director, Jim Bridenstine, and we're excited to have Jim here with us. And he's an old friend of OCPAC and one of the most solid conservatives we've ever had here in Oklahoma in the U.S. Congress. So before we start the meeting, I've asked Warren Hamilton, Senator Warren Hamilton, to open in prayer. You know, there was a time when our representatives and our senators and our political leaders were devout Christians, and they wanted to rule in a Christ-like way. And I think we may be seeing that come back, and I'm excited to have Warren Hamilton. And then when Jim Bridenstine was in Congress, am I right? You were Senator Joe Newhouse, who's one of our most conservative senators here. He had one year that really dinged him. He got a very low score. He was flying jets over in the Middle East or somewhere. Am I right? I don't know. He never voted. So he got a low score that year. And we need to see if we can adjust that perhaps. But one of the great conservative senators, and we're just excited to have Joe here. And he's going to lead our pledge, even though Brigadier General Hopper Smith is in the house. He has agreed to let this Navy jet fighter lead the pledge. So just really great to have these patriots. And then as you see on your table, we're going to sing the prayer verse of the national anthem here today. So Warren Hamilton, would you get us started by leading in prayer?
Would you bow with me, please? Would you stand with me, please? Thank you. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We thank you for America. We thank you that braver and stronger and better ladies and gentlemen than we came across the ocean 400 years ago, and they said for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. Father, we know that you've blessed us. We ask that we be aware of you, that you be foremost in our minds, that we be obedient to you, and that ultimately that we serve you. And that we serve you by loving each other. We serve you by being thankful. We serve you by always striving to be closer to you and to do your will. Father, we thank you for these great patriots who are here today. We thank you for everybody who's interested in America. We thank you for this great food that you blessed us with. We ask that you bless the hands who prepared it. Bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies and us to thy service. And we ask it in the all-powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Warren, and thank you, Bob. What a pleasure to be with so many maskless conservatives. It would be an honor if you'd join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Stand at attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. I want to welcome all the legislators who are here with us today. And I saw Jake Merrick. Did I see Jake back here with the glasses? Nathan Dahm, our vaunted senator from Tulsa, who we all have grown to love and appreciate. Are there any other legislators here today that I've perhaps missed or seen? So great to have you guys here. By the way, there are encouraging things here and there, flickers of light around the nation. There was a school teacher in Louisiana who stood before his school board and said that he was tired of having to teach little kids to use other pronouns other than he and she in order to be inclusive. And it was encouraging me to see a government school teacher stand up to his school board and say, this is ridiculous. And yes. And we need to see a wave across America of teachers, school board members, who say, no, this has to stop. It is ridiculous. It is unchristian. It is sexist. And this racism that we're teaching. And by the way, thank you, Governor Stitt. Thank you. I would encourage all of you to send him an email, make a phone call. I'm told that he's getting some heat from the other side. They're just a bunch of loudmouth racists. They hate America. Why do we listen to them? And yes, we need to fight back because we will not put up with that kind of filth in our classrooms. And thank you, Governor Stitt. God bless you. Okay. Last week, Charlie talked about secession, and so it made me a little nervous. I thought you might think we're a radical right-wing group. I said that to one of our board members, and he said, well, we are. Well, we didn't know anybody. Yeah, so, but there are a lot of things we think about prior to that, and one of them are covenants between states that give states the ability to do an end run around the federal government's ability to control states in a variety of areas. And those are things we need to think about. Nullification are things we need to think about. So, I've asked Steve Anderson, in addition, and he's going to talk about some of those things here today. We got a little bit of new information on Cindy Byrd. And, the reason we talk about Cindy is not so much Cindy as the State Auditor's and Inspector's Office, who is supposed to be their commission to look out for your best interest and make sure that government entities are doing the right thing and not hiding money, as the Oklahoma State Department of Health has done, and they conned your legislators out of millions and millions and millions of dollars that came out of your pockets.
Yep, that's right.
Money they already had, they pretended they didn't have, and in the midst of that, they fired almost 200 county health workers around the state in rural areas. People who no longer had jobs because of the scam. All the people who did that still have their jobs. You're paying them millions of dollars a year to continue doing what they're doing. And that's why Steve and I are working so diligently on this. We hope that the state auditor would not block us in this effort, and certainly not the AG's office. But I've asked Steve, if you would, Steve, could you come forward and talk to us about that, and then talk to us about some state compacts that might bring us to a point where we don't have to secede. If you would, welcome Steve Anderson.
As we peel back the layers of onions on this scandal, some of the things that you would have never thought have come to light. Particularly last week, I was mentioning that there is no Cindy Byrd that's registered with the CPA Society. Now, I had a rather brisk conversation with her media person, where they called me a liar. Now we'll look and see who's the liar here. You run the first piece. Now if you looked on your ballot, remember it was Cindy Byrd. I looked it up on the ballot piece. Here is how she presents herself as state auditor. As you can see, I can find nowhere on the site where she was anything with Cindy Byrd. Please go to the next one. Next screen, please. Here is how she's listed on the official list of state employees, Cindy Byrd. Go to the next one. This is the most important document she signs. This is the Consolidated Annual Financial Report. Cindy Byrd. And please go to the next one. I'll make this short so we can get to the. This is the search for Cindy Byrd. Well, certainly I wasn't lying. It turns out there's another name, which has never been shared with us. I couldn't find it anywhere publicly. And there may be a reason she didn't want us to see it. Just bring it up. There's Cynthia Byrd, which is the name she registered under. Now, she's the state auditor inspector. If you look under government audit, she's not qualified. Which explains why when we went in and talked to her the first time, and she told us we didn't know what was in the Federal Single Audit Act audits. And certainly I do know what's in them. I've got a lot of exposure to them. I had a yes in that category when I was still an active CPA. And here there's another view of it, those of you that didn't have it quite so clearly. There's a reason she was using the name Cindy Byrd. She didn't want you to see this. She won by only 900 in the primary. But it gets uglier than this. Apparently the reason that they were so agitated the first time we met with them is they thought that we were setting myself up to run for state auditor. I assure you, there is no chance. I'm already serving the Lord and my wife in that order, and that's a full-time job. Plus, I've already done my time in government. There's nothing, but it's pretty ugly that our state auditor is not concerned about getting to the root of a scandal.
Yes.
That never should have occurred in the first place. The money was always there. And she held the key in those Federal Single Audit Act audits. Because the money, as we know, was hidden in federal accounts. That's why we wanted to see them. And believe me, they've obstructed us at every turn. We've finally got a couple of them, and we'll be saying more and more about it going forward. But where she thinks it's politics, and to us it's about the 30 million and the 198 employees, and on that, I got a call last week. And that's one of the things I want to encourage anyone that knows anything about this to come forward. Every bit of information helps, because we're sure not getting help here. And that employee was a woman well into her second decade of state service, out in far western Oklahoma, that all of a sudden she finds herself without a job. Now imagine that you're married, you have a family, you're raising, you've got a job one day and the next day you don't. And you're in a county that's rural hospital is barely surviving, and we're yanking health professionals away from it. And that is a double hit. One is an employee who hasn't been done right, and a part of the state that's underserved with health already. So we're going to continue digging, as Bob and I promised on the start of this. We will not be intimidated. The 5-page letter from the Attorney General did nothing but strengthen our resolve, and we will continue on this. Now on to the subject of compacts. I had the, I guess, fortune or misfortune, depending on how it played out, to do some work on Chris Christie's first budget when he was elected governor of New Jersey. So I went back as a contractor, was working on it, and I came across something called the Delaware River Basin Commission. And I was asking some of the people there, why are you giving a bunch of state money to this commission? It looks just like it's a paperwork thing. They said, no, you don't understand. Basically what they were doing was pushing the feds out by making agreements between all the states that the water ran through. They took control of it, and as I was later to find out, the deeper I got into government, that a lot of the functions that you think are federal functions, like the Environmental Protection Agency, are actually performed by state agencies under a maintenance agreement. So what they had done was basically nullified federal power. Now, when I worked for Sam Brown back in Kansas, I brought it up to Sam, who's a great man, by the way, an incredible moral code, but he'd never heard of doing it. And we had an issue on the Oklahoma-Kansas border, and that is that farmers and livestock raisers couldn't go back and forth between sale barns and elevators if they were on one side to an elevator on the Kansas side and vice versa without ICC license. So they'd have to hire somebody to haul it. Legally, they could sneak deck the roads, but that of course, that's really not how we want to operate. So we entered in with the compact. I think it was 50 miles was the agreement. It may have been less. I'd have to go back and look, with Oklahoma. So there is a history here. Now, what we wanted was a greater history. In fact, Sam reached out to the administration that was in power at the time to try to put together a compact where high-value crop processors could move up and down the north-south axis. Texas was in agreement with us, without having to be stopped at the state and inspected by 5 to 7 agencies. In other words, doing what government ought to do was get the heck out of the way of business. There was no cost to it. And it was one of those things that we've always said, that if you start in North Dakota and work to Texas, there's a 12-month growing season that rivals California's. We got cheaper land, better labor, better environment for working with ag. We couldn't even get a call back from the administration. Governor Fallon didn't return the call, and the Commerce Secretary didn't return the call. But there is great opportunity here. And I think that's the thing we need to be looking at. We can do these things, and if it gets to the point we don't have a perfect union, certainly it would make it a lot easier to move on. Because certainly if you don't create a tremendously vibrant economy, there are a couple catch-alls that we have allowed the federal government to trap us in. Medicare, Social Security.
Yes.
And many of us in this room receive those. And certainly that is the threat that they would hold. You create a vibrant enough economy. One time we sat down and worked on the calculation. It takes a pretty vibrant economy. It can be done where the federal tax money you normally send to DC, you keep in the states, and you probably could continue to make those payments.
Yep.
But the first thing is create that vibrant economy. And I have to encourage our governor, and I think that as a businessman, certainly he would understand that there is a potential to do federal nullification just through doing compacts with all the estates that agree with us. And when you think North Dakota to Texas, that's Mexico to Canada. And here's kind of a little thing most people don't know, is the major north-south road between Canada and Mexico is not federal highway. In fact, Interstate 35 disappears in Kansas, which a lot of things disappear in Kansas. I grew up there. I love it there. But still, it's considered the great voyage by a lot of people. FM radio signals used to disappear. There's things that we could do there that would make this a sort of strength of the country. Think we're ag and we're energy. We've got those things. And there is opportunity there. Let us hope that we don't ever come to that point. But I hope we start down that road. And I will assure you that Bob and I will continue on this Department of Health issue. That there will be no backing on. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I neglected to mention Ryan Walters. Ryan wrote a very nice article. As you know, Ryan was either Teacher of the Year, runner-up Teacher of the Year, as a history teacher, a great communicator, and a great historian. And he wrote a very nice article that was published in the Tulsa World about the governor signing this legislation that does not allow teachers to teach, that certain skin colors are superior to other skin colors and certain sexes are superior to other sexes. And so you might look for a copy of that. I think I'm going to publish it next Monday so you can read it. Very, very well done.
Okay, I'm going to move on to introduce Jim Bridenstine. And I want to tell you the first time I ever met Jim Bridenstine. And I don't know if you remember this, Jim. But it was a private breakfast, about 8 or 10 people there. Paul Blair and I were invited. I can't remember for sure. It might have been Charles Key who sponsored that breakfast. And we walked in, and lo and behold, there was Congressman Bridenstine. He had just been elected to the U.S. House. And the person that we were having the breakfast with was an author by the name of Woods, fellow now out of Kansas. And Mr. Woods, I don't remember the first name, had just written a book called Nullification. And he was to speak to our state senators about nullification. And lo and behold, I found out that Jim had already read the book. And he was brand new. And he said, I read it. I understand the overreach in Washington. I think it's got great points to it. It's something that needs to be understood and talked about. He also said, now, if you all smoke me out, he said, I might not win re-election, but he said, I want to do all I can help on this issue from the standpoint of Washington, D.C. That's the first time I ever met Jim. He's been to OCPAC multiple times, and and I always appreciated the stories that he told about the immense pressure that he was under when first elected to cave and to vote for Congressman Monyer to be the next, continue to be the Speaker of the House. Jim had run on a promise that he would not vote for him. The pressure was enormous. He did not vote for Boehner. The reason Jim's the finest U.S. representative we've ever had is because he's also the only one that we've ever had from Oklahoma that have joined the Freedom Caucus, which is the most constitutional conservative group out there. And so I can assure you, in my opinion, he's the finest U.S. representative we've ever had from Oklahoma. Please welcome Jim Bridenstine.
Well, thank you for that great welcome. It's great to be here in Oklahoma City. Before I begin, I need to share with you what I'm doing now, because I'm taking time away from work to be here. And a couple of things. So I left NASA on January 20th, which of course was Inauguration Day. I came back to Oklahoma, and I got involved in a private equity firm called Acorn Growth Companies. And what we do is we invest in aerospace, defense, and intelligence companies. These, of course, are companies that do great things to make America strong. I will tell you, I'm new to private equity. There's no doubt about that. But I'm not new to aerospace, defense, and intelligence. And so I am thrilled to be back in Oklahoma working in private equity, doing these kind of investments that make America strong. So that's my advertisement for anybody who's looking to invest. By the way, I'm not asking anybody to invest. A couple of things. I was asked to come talk about space, why it matters to us as American citizens, why did President Trump create the Space Force, and how does NASA play into these kind of activities. A couple of things that I think are important to note. Every single one of us in this room is dependent on space every day in ways that most of us don't realize. And I'll just give you some examples. The way we communicate is overwhelmingly, of course, dominated by space-based communications. We think about things like DirecTV, Dish Network, internet broadband from space. If you're from rural Oklahoma, and I know there are representatives here, state senators, state house members that are from rural Oklahoma, you probably have a lot of constituents that get their internet broadband from space. Without that, there would not be any high-speed connectivity keeping us all connected. We think about those kind of things. We think about over-the-horizon communications. How do we, in the theater of battle, take high-resolution motion picture images and zip them all over the world so that commanders can make decisions as to what target to take or what target to not take? These are important over-the-horizon communications, all dependent on space. Beyond that, if you use a cell phone, the data that goes over the terrestrial wireless networks, all of that data is regulated by a timing signal that comes from the GPS constellation. If we lose GPS, we lose basically your cell phone is not going to work. And these are just some of the areas in communications where we are dependent on space. Then we start thinking about the power grid. That timing signal that regulates data on the terrestrial wireless network, it also regulates the flows of energy on the power grid. If we lose that, we lose the power grid in the United States of America. And then, when we take it a step further, the way we navigate, of course, people are familiar with GPS. The way we produce food, right now, we are proving that we can reduce water usage while increasing crop yields and preserving nitrates in the soil by using technology that we have right now in orbit around the Earth, feeding more of the world than ever before, which of course is a great export for the United States of America. So these are all, that's how we produce food, how we produce energy, cleanly, as a matter of fact. How we do disaster relief, how we predict weather, how we understand climate. By the way, when you get up in the morning and you turn on the television and you see the green blob and you know when and where the weather's going to be, 80% of that data in that green blob from your weather person 80% of that data is coming from space. Space is critically important for all of these different aspects of our lives. So I can't overemphasize. There's another one. A lot of people don't realize. Every banking transaction in this country is dependent on a timing signal from GPS as well. If we lose banking in this country, or if we lose the GPS timing signal, we lose banking. Friends, there's no milk in the grocery store within 3 days. That is why space has become an existential threat to the United States of America. And it is in fact why the competitors, I don't want to say enemies, because until we go to war, they're not enemies. Questionable, of course. The competitors of the United States of America are rapidly building capability to launch direct ascent anti-satellite missiles to destroy satellites in space. They're building co-orbital anti-satellite capabilities. In other words, satellites that can intercept and destroy other satellites that are hiding out in space, that are in some cases not detectable or even unknown. We think about jamming and spoofing and dazzling and hacking. Dazzling is using laser energy to confuse satellites. Of course, remote sensing from space is used for all kinds of purposes for the warfighter in the battlefield. We're talking about tactical intelligence to win wars. Look, space is critically important for the United States of America in ways that most Americans don't think about day in and day out. But you know who does think about it? The enemies of the United States. They think about it. And they're building capability to destroy it. And because of that, we have gotten behind. And here's what the enemy needs to know. And by the way, it's what President Trump was very strong on. They will not get an advantage over the United States by coming up with and investing in ways to destroy space. And if we do it right, they won't even make those investments to begin with because they know they won't get an advantage from it. Now, I will tell you, until recently, we haven't been doing it right. And that's why it was important to create the Space Force. When I was in the House of Representatives, there was a small group of us that got activated in creating what was called the Space Corps. Think of it like the Marine Corps is to the Navy. It is a separate military fighting force, but it reports to the Secretary of the Navy. We wanted to create, in the National Defense Authorization Act, what was called the Space Corps, which would report, a separate military force that would report to the Secretary of the Air Force. And in fact, we did that in the House of Representatives. I was on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, which oversees all of our national security space capabilities on the military side. And we got it passed through that committee. We got it through the full Armed Services Committee, which, by the way, when I voted against Boehner, they threatened to kick me off of, before I voted against them. Yep. And then, anyway, we voted against him and we kept our position, so it worked out. But you remind me of these stories. My goodness, it's been too long. But we have to think about this. We passed it in the House. We passed it through the Armed Services Committee, through the entire. On the floor of the House, this bill got 344 bipartisan votes. How many times do you think a big project like creating a new military service will get 344 votes on the floor of the House? Doesn't happen. Now, ultimately, it went to the Senate, and it died in the Senate. That was in, I think, 2017. It might have even been 2016, but I think it was 2017. Eventually, President Trump took up the mantle and carried it forward, and it did, in fact, pass, and it got bipartisan support. And, in fact, the new president has said, we're actually going to keep it because it's necessary. I will tell you what's happening in space is scary, and it's critically important that we in this room understand what we need to do to defend space. Now, I'm going to, for the next few minutes, I know, Charlie, you took all my time. I got to give Shane Jett some time when I'm done. So let's see, I've got a few minutes here. A couple of things. When we think about space in general, I like to think of it as an element of national power. So when you go through Air Command and Staff College, for example, if you're in the military and you're doing that joint professional military education, you learn about something called the DIME theory of national power. DIME is an acronym. It stands for diplomatic power, information power, military power, and economic power. I see General Hopper Smith over here nodding his head. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. So the diplomatic power of it, we think about NASA, for example, is a tool of diplomacy. NASA is not in the Department of Defense, intentionally. General Eisenhower, I should say President Eisenhower, when we created NASA, he wanted it separate from the military-industrial complex. That's what he said. He wants it to be a tool of diplomacy. So we do science, we do discovery, we do exploration, and we do a lot of international engagement. Right now, the International Space Station is operated by 15 countries. Of course, without the United States of America, it wouldn't exist. We lead the world. We should lead the world. It's our role in the world to lead. And that's what the International Space Station represents. Beyond the international, that 15 nations operated, we've had astronauts from 19 different countries. We've had experiments on the space station from 103 different countries. And right now, when I left NASA, we had over 700 international agreements, not just for low Earth orbit, which is where the International Space Station is, but for things like heliophysics, the study of the sun with satellites that are in fact in orbit around the sun. We think about planetary science. Some of you saw we just landed a rover on Mars, and we flew for the first time in human history a helicopter on another world. That Perseverance rover, Ingenuity helicopter, these are all parts of international collaborations that are part of this tool of diplomacy that is in fact science and exploration and discovery. So we think about that tool of diplomacy, over 700 international agreements on projects from planetary science, astrophysics, the study of deep space, the study of the sun, and of course, the study of our own planet, which is critically important. I will tell you, when I was the NASA administrator, highest priority was we are going to get the data on what happens when whatever it is that is happening to the Earth, and the Earth is changing, as it always has. We will collect that data, and we will share it with the world for free. But what NASA does not do, at least not under my leadership, we do not create policy prescriptions based on what we learn. If we do that, it becomes political, it becomes partisan, and that is not what science is all about. Science is all about dispassionately following the data. That's what it's about. And that's what we collected, and that's what we disseminated. And by the way, that is not what politicians in Washington, D.C. like to do. Just so you're aware. Not that you weren't. Okay, so we talked about the tool of diplomacy. Then there's information power. People say, well, what is information power? One of the stories I like to tell is the story of Apollo 8. We have to go back to Apollo 6. Apollo 6 was the first launch of a Saturn rocket, which was the rocket that was going to take our astronauts to the moon. And that Saturn rocket on Apollo 6 failed. It did what we call pogo, which means it vibrated really bad. Parts of the rocket fell off. The second stage has 5 engines. Of that second stage, only 3 of the engines worked. The upper stage is the command and service module, which is the device that was going to orbit the moon while our astronauts went down and landed. That command and service module that had 1 engine. That 1 engine has to reignite dozens of times for orbital insertion, around the moon, and translunar injection, and then Earth injection, all those different parts of the architecture to get to and from the moon. That single engine for that command and service module on Apollo 6 in orbit around the Earth, it failed to reignite even once.
Oh, wow.
It wouldn't even reignite. What does that mean? That means if you take that sucker to the moon and it doesn't reignite, you're going to be stranded there until you run out of air. So this was, and then the velocity of the capsule was not sufficient to test the heat shield because the engines on the second stage didn't work and the command and service module engine wasn't working properly. So this was an utter failure. It was an uncrewed mission, but when they came home, the next day they got intelligence. The intelligence was that the Soviet Union was going to be around the moon by the end of 1968. And so what did NASA do? They redoubled their efforts. And they said, well, if they're going to be around the moon by the end of 1968, so are we. So they dropped the lunar lander. Some of you have seen the movie Apollo 13. Yes. The lunar lander, they called it the lifeboat. It was, in fact, the lifeboat. On Apollo 8, we went without a lifeboat. They dropped it. Why? Because they were trying to get into orbit around the moon with humans before the end of 1968 to beat the Soviet Union. There's a point to this story, and you're going to hear it. At the end of that effort, Christmas was when they were going to have to be at the moon. They were going to have to launch a few days before Christmas. They were going to be in orbit around the moon on Christmas. And this was the very next launch of that Saturn rocket. Remember, second stage, 2 engines failed. The command and service module, that one engine didn't reignite even once. Now it has to reignite over and over again. We're going to the moon in that vehicle. And oh, by the way, we are not going to have a human landing system that would be the lifeboat to propel our astronauts back home. And the assessment was at the time that there's a 50% probability that our astronauts aren't coming back. And if we strand them at the moon, we're going to strand them there on Christmas Eve.
Oh my gosh.
That was December of 1968.
Oh my goodness.
Now here's what's important to remember. They went to the moon, and on Christmas Eve, 1968, 1 out of every 4 people in the planet heard or saw the broadcast from the United States of America from the moon. 1 out of 4 on the planet. And their message to all of humanity was, Genesis 1:1 through Genesis 1:10, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Wow.
You have to remember that in 1968, behind the Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union, it was illegal to celebrate Christmas. And here we had American astronauts in orbit around the moon taking great risk upon themselves and delivering a message about God.
Yes.
That is a tool of information power that cannot be replicated. And I would also say, imagine reaching behind the Iron Curtain. Think 1968. How do you reach behind the Iron Curtain? With a message that is important for the whole world to hear.
Wow.
And of course, they got sued. Madeline O'Hare sued, and obviously the reasons were separation of church and state. That's another speech. I'll come back another time.
Did she lose?
No.
Did she win?
Yeah, so
Oh.
it was 1968. A lot has happened since then. But that's another discussion for another day. Here's what I want to get to. That tool of information power is important. Why? About 13 years later, a president named Ronald Reagan that nobody saw coming decided to create what was called the Strategic Defense Initiative. And it was a missile defense shield, and we needed a space layer for sensor capability. And everybody on the left in this country said it was too expensive, it can't happen. They belittled it. They called it the Star Wars program, to which Ronald Reagan said, yes, we're calling it the Star Wars program. And in the end, the United States of America spent hardly anything on the Strategic Defense Initiative. But at the enemy of the United States, the Soviet Union, they spent a lot. And they tried to undermine the Star Wars program, figure out how to defeat it, do all of the diplomacy saying that the United States was provocative. And here's what's important to note. This is so important. The reason people all around the world believed that the Star Wars program could be successful is because 12 or 13 years earlier, they saw humans walking on the surface of the moon with an American flag. They believed that if we could do that, we could certainly build a missile defense shield. And guess what? They were right, and that missile defense shield is going to come to the United States. Critically important. We need, another story, but we need sensor layers in space to ultimately be able to intercept in a very robust form. We can do interception now, but not at the level that is appropriate for a nation like the United States of America. Okay, so that's the tool of information. I would also say, when I was NASA, we landed another robot on Mars called InSight. We were in a newspaper in Tehran, if you can imagine that. The newspaper, I don't remember the name of it, but the subtitle was the Hardline. It was the Hardline publication of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Wow.
And they had this article about how NASA just landed on Mars. That the United States of America is the only country that has ever successfully landed on Mars. We've done it 8 times. And the last paragraph talked about how on this mission, We had all these various international partners were with us. Why is it important to get that message into Tehran? Because it has the ability to change the perception of young people towards the United States of America, where they're not getting good messages. So just as Apollo 8 back in 1968 got messages behind the Iron Curtain, today NASA is getting messages into Tehran. It's about science, it's about exploration, it's about discovery, but more than anything, it's about inspiration and hope. And it changes the perception of young people all over the world towards the United States of America. It is a critical piece, in my view, of our national security and diplomatic apparatus. That's the tool of information power. Now on the military side, NASA doesn't do military. We don't fight and win wars. But I will tell you, a lot of our technology that we develop actually has great application by the Department of Defense. On the economic side, this is where it gets even more crazy sometimes. Right now on the International Space Station, you guys heard me talk about earlier on the economic side, the way we communicate, the way we navigate, the way we produce food and energy, the way we do disaster relief, predict weather. All these things are necessary for the way we live and work every day. And of course, we're taking the capabilities there and commercializing those capabilities as rapidly as possible. But it's important to remember that beyond all of that, right now on the International Space Station, we're using microgravity to create pharmaceuticals that you cannot compound here in the gravity well of Earth. So we're creating treatments. We have created, on the International Space Station, created and advanced immunizations for salmonella, for example. People say, well, salmonella, how much of a risk is salmonella? Well, here in the United States, it's not. But it's the third leading cause of death among infants when you're in Africa. So if you can immunize children from salmonella, you can actually save lots of lives. That was advanced on the International Space Station. Immunization for pneumonia, for example, has been advanced on the International Space Station. The value of microgravity is significant, and these investments are not just by the government. These are commercial private investments that are capitalizing and promoting their own capabilities that are going to have beneficial effects for human life here on Earth. I'll give you another example. We are using adult stem cells. Adult stem cells. Your own skin. Let's see, General Hopper Smith, your own skin. We can take your skin, get stem cells from it, take it to the International Space Station, and create your tissue specifically for you. And right now it's just tissue. The reason it's microgravity or zero gravity is so important is because it can grow in 3 dimensions. You do that here on Earth and the tissue just goes flat. But in space, it's a lot like being in a mother's womb. It grows very uniquely. It grows in a way that is capable of delivering life-saving therapies for humans here on Earth. Now, right now it's tissue. Eventually it's going to be your own organs, which is going to be great for you. It won't help me at all. But this is, I kid General Hopper Smith. Okay, so here's the thing that's important. Those are pharmaceutical, biological kind of advancements. Then there's another thing that's important, which is advanced materials. We can create materials so thin on the International Space Station, one atom thick, 2 atoms thick. What does that mean? We can create an artificial retina for the human eye, so that people who have macular degeneration don't have to lose their eyesight. Last time I said this, people were like, how do I get that? Well, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But here's the thing. It can be done. That's the value of microgravity. And this kind of activity, it needs to be privately invested in. We need private capital investing in it, and we need that private capital ultimately to result in breakthrough technology that benefits our lives here on Earth. There's so much more to talk about, but I'm going to stop with that. Just remember the DIME theory of national power: diplomatic power, economic power. I'll go in order: diplomatic, information, military, and economic power. NASA plays a critical role in all of those, but that M, that's not where NASA is. But I will tell you, I've been a huge advocate for, and I still do, every chance I get, talk about the importance of that big M in DIME. So with that, I just want to say, with the Space Force and with NASA, things are actually moving forward in a very positive way. That's good for our country. and it's got bipartisan support, which is also positive. And with that, I'll turn it over to a few questions. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Okay, I think we have 2 questions, and that's all we have time for, so we'll start here with Reed, and then we'll head to the back of the room.
Have you read 1 Second After?
I have not.
I would recommend everyone read 1 Second After. What is being done to harden the electoral grid against a natural EMP or man-made EMP?
All right, one more question here. Oh,
Yes, sir. Essentially, timing, for lack of a better word, is life. So in the GPS denied environment, we talked about our timing dependence, we talked about secession, continuity of our own state government. How do we prepare for that, or what is being done? My other question was going to be about space junk, so you can pick one of the 2.
Okay. So space junk, it's a very dangerous environment right now. We've got billionaires that are launching constellations into space of thousands and thousands of satellites. The modeling indicates, we don't have an agency that is responsible for managing space debris. And the problem is the FCC does it by default. And they do it based on satellite by satellite. If your satellite has less than 1 in 10,000 chance of having a collision, well, guess what? You can get a license to launch that satellite. But if you take a constellation of 4,800 satellites and you launch them into space, that constellation is not 1 in 10,000. That constellation says over 15 years, you're going to have 13.2 collisions. So instead of licensing based on a probability of collision, now the United States government is licensing based on collisions themselves, which is wrong and it needs to be fixed. Members of Congress need to understand this. They need to pass laws to create, basically follow through on President Trump's Space Policy Directive 3, which ultimately said that the Department of Commerce will have authority over this. But it's mitigation, it's 4 steps: mitigation, space situational awareness. We've got to know what's up there, which means we need sensors on the ground and in space. Space traffic management, which requires, just like air traffic management, Frank Volpe, for those who don't know, flew in the United States Navy, go Navy. So just like we have air traffic management, we need space traffic management, which doesn't exist right now. Who can compel somebody to maneuver in space? The answer is nobody. That needs to be fixed, and then ultimately we need remediation capability to bring the space junk out of space. Right now, the United States of America is not leading on this the way we should be leading. That's going to require appropriations from Congress, and look forward to working. I know I'm going to take just 1 second. Hopper was looking at me. Hopper, go.
Care to comment on the upcoming Senate race?
Yeah. So a couple of things. Okay, the question was, do I care to comment on the upcoming Senate race? 2022, I presume. A couple of things, and Charlie mentioned this earlier. Look, I challenged an incumbent Republican in a Republican primary. I did that. A lot of people in this group supported me when I did that. It's also true that I followed through on the promises that I said I would do. I voted against the Speaker of the House on the floor of the House. The way they do it is they go behind closed doors, they make a decision, and then if you're in the minority, you have to, lock elbows on the floor of the House. Well, I didn't. I said I was going to do it, and then I followed through. I have challenged the establishment. I voted against every omnibus spending bill. I voted against every debt ceiling increase. I have done these things, and it has not always been fun. I would also tell you, I say that to build credibility. Because, look, you guys know me. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. I think it's very difficult to get a better senator than James Langford. And I say that from the bottom of my heart. No. There is not a person out there that has higher integrity and is going to be more conservative. People might be upset about a letter that he wrote or something like that. A lot. But look at his voting record. And I understand I've just made half the audience, probably more now. But that's okay. I will tell you what I think, just as I always have, and I did in Washington, D.C., and I hope everybody here can respect that. I think Senator Langford has done a marvelous job, and if we oust him, based on a letter that he wrote or some other nuanced thing, I think it's a wrong thing to do for our state and for the country.
Thank you.
We have other questions. One that I might just ask if there's a quick answer, because in 1 minute. Any comment about, I think, Colonial Grid, the oil pipeline went out because of satellite?
Yeah, so obviously that's a cybersecurity issue, you know, we think about this ransomware capability. This is I will tell you, how does this relate to space? Cybersecurity and space go hand in hand. Before we had the Space Force, the Air Force was responsible for space, and they were responsible for cybersecurity. We separated the Space Force so that they wouldn't be responsible for space specifically. But I would also tell you, what is a satellite constellation? It is a node in a network. That's all it is, especially when you think about space-based communications. We're collecting data and information, and we're sharing it through this constellation of network capability. To the extent that satellites are vulnerable, everything else becomes vulnerable. And so cybersecurity absolutely has to be paramount in today's environment. So with that, I will yield back. Thank you so much.
All right, Jim, we still love you. But you might look at last week's meeting. So, Senator Jett has to be on the floor in maybe 20 minutes. So he's going to take just a few minutes with us to talk to us real quickly about our activism, because your role is not optional, it's mandatory, and here's Shane to tell you how. Shane Jett.
Thank you, Bob. I absolutely love this group. I appreciate you being stalwart warriors ready to battle for freedom. I'm a huge fan of Congressman, former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. I geek out about space. The last 11 years I served in the United States Navy as an intelligence officer. The last 2 years I was in the Naval Space Cadre Pipeline doing National Reconnaissance Organization training and satellites. So I completely gobble this up. You're a hero to Oklahoma forever. I'm also here, thank you. Senator Warren Hamilton is here. Senator Dom, Stalwart Warrior for Freedom. Also, there was a Naviator. Where did he leave already? So my good friend Senator Joe Newhouse is also a Navy aviator. So we got some military chops. Hamilton is a Marine helicopter pilot, so a genuine BA. Do the math on that. Very quickly. Now remember, last week we went through this, right? And you're like, but Shane, this does not fit in my wallet. It doesn't fit in my suit jacket. It doesn't fit in my purse very well. I have to fold. You know, wouldn't it be nice if someone had an app to put on my smartphone and I could just carry my phone around and then I could reference it and they had pictures. And, oh, if I wanted to call them, I could just scroll down and hit the call button. Wouldn't that be nice? Oh, and we also have Senator Merrick right here, a stalwart warrior for freedom. Are there any other senators before I get myself in trouble? So wouldn't that be nice if we had that? Next slide, please. Right here, if you have a Google phone, it's right here, courtesy of the Oklahoma Co-op Association. They have created an app. All the information is here. Is in this app. Now you're saying, oh Shane, I'm gonna have to call my grandchild and have them to load this on my phone. Can it be easier than that? Scroll to the next screen, please. Now this is if you have an iPhone. Again, you'll have to type OKLA 58, dyslexia, 58TH. They're like, Shane, that's hard. I'm still going to have to call my grandchildren. Can it be easier than that? Well, as a former teacher for 7 years, why, yes, it can. So if you will hold your smartphone up in the air right now, hold it up. This is group participation. Hold up your sir, you do not, someone provide this gentleman with a smartphone. Oh, bless you. They are in the advanced class. They're just monitoring to make sure that you guys are getting credit. All right. What you need to do is text 405. This is so easy. You're going to text 405 476-7501, and you're going to say iPhone. If you own an iPhone. Now, I can't help you here. You may have to call your granddaughter and ask her if you have an Android or an iPhone. But if you know, text me the word iPhone. If you have a Google phone or an Android, text the word Android. And what you will get back is a link that will have the app. All you have to do is click on that link. It'll populate and you download it. Okay? So this is power in your hands. But I needed to show you this last week so you could fully appreciate how easy this is. Both of these are tools in your hand. If you text me over the next 30 minutes, I will text you from the Senate floor the link for you to download this app. You come back next week empowered and we'll go to the next level. Bob, thank you so much, and I'm heading to the Senate floor.
Thank you so much. I think we are out of time, by the way. If you have a writing tool in front of you, Governor Stitt's office phone is 405-521-2342. I might say that one more time for those of you who want to ramp up and get ready. Senator Hamilton, so good to have you with us today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Nathan, you're still here? Can you come up and close us in prayer? And if you have 2 seconds worth of something to say, you're welcome to do that. But next week, we're going to be at the Oklahoma City Golf and Country Club. And A.J. Parati, who is a very, very conservative attorney here and has represented Republican causes, is going to talk about judges in the state of Oklahoma and issues we have with judges. So you won't want to miss that. That's our most underrepresented area in OCPAC and many conservative groups. We don't talk enough about judges who, regrettably, I think they rule the country.
Yes.
We got to put a stop to that.
Yes.
They think so too, yeah. So A.J. Parati next Wednesday at the Country Club, and I think that's all I have. So,
Bob,
whoa.
give the number again.
Oh, let me give that number again. Yeah, to Governor Stitt, area 405-521-2342. Senator Dom, would you close us out?
Thank you, Bob. Let me make 2 quick announcements. First of all, I know when I brought Sharon before, I've recognized her because she does a phenomenal job working at my office at the Capitol. But I also have 4 homeschool high school pages serving this week, so we brought them here this week as well so that they could learn more about what OCPAC does, about the conservative movement in Oklahoma. So I wanted to recognize and embarrass them. So everybody look over at them and clap for them. You guys want to stand up real quick so you get extra embarrassed? Come on. So, whenever I have a page serving for me, I try to bring them here on Wednesdays. You guys can sit down. I always bring them to go to Pops with them out in Arcadia on Tuesdays to kind of bribe them so that they can come and sit through Charlie on Wednesdays. But glad to have them here. And then the second thing I mentioned to Bob before, we still have Senate Bill 2, the Save Women's Sports Act. It passed the House. It is sitting over in the Senate. It is eligible to be heard any day. However, we have had days that we have not been voting on bills. It is eligible to be heard right now, but it is being held up. That's Senate Bill 2, the Save Women's Sports Act. So please be contacting Senate leadership, that's Pro Tem Treat, that's Floor Leader Kim David, and ask them to give that bill a hearing as soon as possible. Otherwise, they will run out the clock and that bill will not be passed this year. So we have until the end of session, but there's no reason we aren't voting on that yesterday, today, tomorrow. It is eligible to be heard any day, and it has not been put on the agenda. So those are my 2 announcements. That's Senate Bill 2, Save Women's Sports Act, be contacting Senate leadership. And with that, I'll close out with prayer if you all wouldn't mind standing, if you're comfortable, bowing, whatever you all prefer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the freedoms that we still have in this country. We know that every good and perfect gift comes from you above. We know that our freedoms come from our Creator. They're not endowed to us by a government. The government has the responsibility to protect our rights, but our rights ultimately come from you above. We thank you for the salvation that we have through Jesus Christ, knowing that that is the only way by which man can be saved. We thank you for a restoration of righteousness in this land. We ask for a revival, just as we've seen numerous times in our land, a great awakening coming upon this land. It's happened many times before, and it is time for that again. We know that ultimately truth will prevail. And so we ask you for the truth of Jesus Christ, the truth of the facts to come forth and to be proclaimed so that all can have that change of heart and that change of mind. Government is not our salvation. Jesus is the way to salvation. So we ask for Jesus to continually be proclaimed. We ask that you would help us to proclaim that as we fight the good fight of faith, as we fight for the rights of ourselves and others, as we fight to advance godly government, good government, righteous government, that we would have you in the forefront in all that we do. We thank you for our steps being ordered by you, for the Holy Spirit leading and guiding us in all that we do and say. We thank you for your grace and mercy upon each and every one of us, for we have need of both your grace and your mercy as we continue to fight this fight. We thank you for all that you are accomplishing through us and the opportunity to, when we arrive in heaven, to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter now into your rest as we continue to serve you and do what you have called us to do. We thank you for all these things. We thank you for your protection as we go forth now. In Jesus' holy, mighty name, amen.